What's going on, everybody? Top 10 Pokemon back, bringing you another Top Pokemon Cards Auctions of the Week recap. Folks, this is going to be a shorter video, but trust me, I got a lot of very interesting auctions. This week will be a little bit heavier on the vintage portion, not a whole lot going on with Modern this week. Although we do have a few awesome sales from Modern, this week will be a little bit more vintage heavy. So the subject of this week's video, we have a couple of high-end cards from the Neo series, that have not been doing very well, and that includes the PSA 10 First Edition Lugia, which has hit a new record low, at least in the past 3 years. So we'll be going over all of that and more. Thank you so much for tuning in. A big thanks to the sponsor that makes this video possible. It is the one and only lowpopping.market on Instagram. Lowpopping.market is your source for high-end Pokemon card investments. On their page, they have a numerous amount of PSA, BGS, and CGC slabs available. And whether you're a vintage collector, a modern collector, or both, lowpopping.market has something for everyone. Did I mention they also ship worldwide? And they accept multiple payment methods as well, which also includes trades for any particular item. I've had numerous people message me about the newest grail they recently obtained from lowpopping.market and just how easy the transaction was. Believe me, folks, you don't want to risk buying an expensive Pokemon card off of shady, no-feedback sellers on eBay. Go to someone who has knowledge about the market and who is also very trustworthy. I wouldn't be endorsing them if I didn't believe it myself. So after the recap, go to Instagram, follow lowpopping.market. I will have that linked in the description below. So without further ado, let's jump into the auction recap, starting off with a couple of interesting modern sales. Here we have the Mewtwo GX from Shining Legends. Came down a little bit this week. This card, we've been seeing it sell for like over $600 in the past couple weeks as a PSA 10. This week sold for $545, which still is not too bad for this card. Then we also saw the Full Art Pikachu from the Generations Radiant Collection, a card we always love seeing. This card sold this week for $310. We saw the BGS 10 Black Label Japanese Magikarp from Triple Beat. This is the most graded card of 2023. If you haven't watched my recent video about the most graded cards of this year, this is the number one, spoiler alert. But this Black Label sold this week for $762. And then we haven't covered this card in a while. It is the PSA 10 Latios GX Alt Art from Team Up that sold this week for $1,432. Now, I do believe next week we have a CGC 10 a CGC 10 Perfect example coming through. So we'll see just what kind of a premium that card will get. Now on to the vintage portion, we have a PSA 10 First Edition base set Raichu that sold on eBay. You don't see these first edition base set cards sell very often on eBay as PSA 10s. This one here sold for $8,400. Here we have a Topps Chrome Sparkle Charizard in PSA 10, sold for $6,972. Here from Jungle, we have a No Symbol Jolteon Holo in a PSA 10 that sold for $2,090. And then here we have a very low pop Unlimited Lapras Holo from Fossil. And I also put out a recent video of the most difficult WotC cards to grade, and this was, at least in the honorable mentions, very, very hard card to get in PSA 10, although this particular slab looks a little bit, I don't know, run through the mud or something. It looks dirty and very scratched up, so the winner of this card, I would advise you maybe get this reslabbed, but hey, whatever you choose to do. This card sold this week for $736. Another very difficult card to grade is this first edition Light Togetic from Neo Destiny. Sold as a PSA 10 for $1,731. And then we had several cards from EX Team Rocket Returns, courtesy of Catch 'em All Collectibles. Here is a Rockets Scizor EX that sold for $958. We have the Rockets Scyther EX sold for $838. Here's a Rockets Suicune EX, sold for $1,694, while this Rockets Moltres EX sold for $733. The Rockets Articuno sold for $940, and the Rockets Entei EX sold for $848. Here we have a Rockets Hitmonchan EX sold for $878, and then the one that sold for the most was the Rockets Snorlax EX that sold for $2,130. Couple of Rayquaza cards. Here's a Rayquaza Level X from Supreme Victors that sold for $1,150. And then from EX Dragon, we saw a Rayquaza EX Holo that sold as a PSA 10 for $997. A couple of Gold Stars came by. Here is a PSA 9 Gold Star Charizard, sold for $3,501. Here is a Gold Star Espeon from the Pop Series 5 in PSA 10 that sold for $9,100 this week. And then we saw this Japanese World's Champions Gold Star Flareon in PSA 10 that sold for $2,900, while this Japanese Gold Star Jolteon sold for $2,400. And then lastly, for the Japanese cards on eBay was this University Magikarp in PSA 9 that sold for $14,099 this week. Up next, I stumbled across this binder collection. Tons of vintage WotC holos. Here you see a bunch of Typhlosions and Charizards, a bunch of Psychic Pokemon including Gengar, Mewtwo, Alakazam, Slowking. Here's a bunch of water types. Here's a bunch of grass types. So it seems like a lot of cards from the first and second generation. Here's a nice little shot of all the fire types available, but this binder set sold for $6,600. Couple pieces of sealed product came by. Here's a black and white Dragons Exalted booster box, sold for $3,056. And then we saw this black and white Plasma Storm booster box, sold for $5,350. And then on to the PWCC weekly auction block, we have this Dialga Level X from Great Encounters that sold as a PSA 10 for $1,530. We have this first edition Houndour from Neo Discovery, a very difficult card to grade, sold for $2,520. Here is a BGS 10 Black Label Japanese Umbreon GX card that sold for $3,240. Here is a Celebi EX from Unseen Forces that sold for $5,280. A couple of crystal cards. There's a Crystal Lugia from Aquapolis that sold for $8,100. And then we saw two Japanese Crystal Charizards with drastically different prices. Here's a PSA 10 that sold for $9,600 and another PSA 10 that sold for $14,400. So from what I can see, the one on the left here is actually a first edition copy, while the one on the right is not, contrary to what the title says. Thus, the one on the right is substantially higher because the unlimited copy, if you will, I believe is much rarer to get your hands on. And then we saw this PSA 10 first edition Alakazam from base set that sold for an even $12,000. And then on to some massive fails from the Neo series. Up first is this PSA 10 first edition Entei from Neo Rev, a beautiful and majestic card that at one point, folks, was selling for $10,347 a couple years ago. This week, this card sold as a PSA 10 for $5,800. Woo, not good, folks, not good. But check it out. We also saw the Raikou from this set in PSA 10. Had sold last year, I don't know, maybe 16 months ago for $8,400. While this week it sold for less than half, selling for $4,050. And then this one's real ugly, folks. Real ugly. Last year, this PSA 10 first edition Suicune from Neo Rev sold for an even $15,000, whereas this week it sold for $6,300. So, what? Nearly a $9,000 decrease for this card. Not good, not good. But these sales pale in comparison to our auction of the week, which is this PSA 10 first edition Lugia from Neo Genesis. Now, before I get into the result of this sale, let's take a little trip down memory lane. This PSA 10 had a notorious sale back in late 2020 for $129,000. And at that point in time, I think most of us were like, well, I guess we'll never have a PSA 10 first edition Lugia, right? But a few months after that, the card dropped down to $76,100. And then back earlier this year, around May, this card sold for about $33,600. And then this past week, this card with the exact same certification number sold for $22,800, giving it about a $107,000 loss from the sale back in late 2020. Folks, you know the drill. Give me your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Hope you enjoyed the recap. Give it a thumbs up if you did. Don't forget to be a subscriber. That's all I got for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you all in my next one.